Welcome to another edition of Keep Calm and Carry. Thanks so much for spending your Monday night with me. I sure do appreciate it. If this is your first time with the channel, my name is Mark, and welcome to Fit and Fire's live chat. This week, I am extremely excited and honored to have Erich Pratt from Gun Owners America on the show tonight. We're going to be talking a lot more about politics this time around than we would typically with our EDC and what guns we're carrying and stuff like that. Because if you guys don't know, here pretty quick, in a couple of weeks, we are going to have midterm elections. And I think this is going to be probably the most important election that we have in the last midterms that goes in the last few decades. I know we always say that every year, but I think as you can tell with how the political climate is going, things are getting a lot more stressed. But before we get into that, I have some shameless plugs as always for Fit and Fire. First and foremost, we've got some upcoming videos to include a brand new build. I've got one part that I'm waiting for it to come in. I ordered it today. It's one of the smallest and easiest parts of the gun, but I needed it to get it completed. And then as soon as I have that come in, we're going to do a kind of an unboxing and a build video. So super excited about that. And then also I'm trying to finish up the Taurus G2C 500 rounds later video, so stay tuned for that. I have both of those coming. I sure do want to say thank you to each and every one of my Patreon members. I really could not do it without your guys' support, and I sure do appreciate it. If you don't remember, last week I hit a milestone on Patreon. I had 10 subscribers, and because of that, I gave away a t-shirt, Fit Fire t-shirt. Building something right now on my t-shirts. Hopefully I'll have some good news to come in the next week or two. I'm working with a t-shirt company to maybe have some for you guys if you're interested in buying those. More information to come on that. And then I'm also trying to wrap up the final touches on my 5,000 subscriber giveaway. So stay tuned for that. I have some really cool stuff to give you guys. And I can tell you that Tac Pack is going to be one of the biggest sponsors for that giveaway. I've already got their contribution to the giveaway, and I don't want to give it away because it has one of my most favorite items in it. I already know what it is. And I hope you guys are extremely interested in sticking around for that. So I'll have a video out here just soon. I just got to get the last couple of things. So with that being said, let's head over to the chat room. Let's take roll call real quick. Let's say hi to everybody and see what's going on. First and foremost, Kevin Ekdahl first tonight. Thank you so much. I sure do appreciate it. And everything you do, your build is looking great. I really like that. Drew Lovelace, hey. Logan White, always good to see you. Haven't seen you in a bit, but it's good to see you. Appreciate it. The Grim Reaper, good to see you. And I don't think that is Drew, Phil, Drew and the Grim Reaper. I don't think that was technically Han Solo's blaster. I believe that blaster, if you'll remember from Solo, the movie, came from somebody else. Ooh, got you there, right? Keith Gregory, David, Lyle, good to see you. That's Kansas GunCom right there. Fan TV, and Andrew, Dalton Ray, William Luttrell. Thanks, guys, for swinging by. We've got a lot of information to cover. If you jump in after I called you out, I will get back to you here in just a second. If you have any questions for us, by all means, throw them in there. We're going to be talking about some pretty hefty things. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Erich Pratt. If you don't already know, he's the guy out front with Gun Owners of America. It is a great organization, and we're going to be talking a lot about the organization and everything that they do tonight. So Erich, thank you so much for joining us tonight. How is your Monday evening going?
Well, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me, and it's going fantastic. It's great to be here with you, Mark.
I sure do appreciate taking your time this evening. I know that you've had a lot on your plate, and taking an hour of your time to sit down and talk with me and my subscribers and anybody else that wants to jump in and view means a lot to me. So without further ado, can you kind of tell us about what GOA is, the Gun Owners of America? Where did it get started, and what's its kind of major focus?
Sure, absolutely. Well, We were founded in 1975 by a former California state senator. He was also a NRA board member at the time, and he left on good terms with them, but he wanted to start a group that was more aggressive and would be holding legislators accountable. And so for the last 40 years, that's what we've been doing. We're the no compromise gun lobby in Washington, D.C. We have over 1.5 million members, and they're extremely active. In fact, the New York Times credited Gun Owners of America's members in 2013 for killing Obama's gun control. And it's an exciting thing when we go up on the Hill. We hear from legislative offices, when they hear you're from Gun Owners of America, they tell us your members are very loud. And so we've been causing the left fits for over 40 years.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny that you say that you see senators and congressmen come out, especially during re-election time, and they kind of wear it as a badge of honor, especially on the left. They talk about their rating with the NRA. I'm waiting for that day that they start talking about my rating with the GOA. That's because I'm pretty sure we know what those ratings are going to be. So,
well, and in fact, we do see that already, because there are cases where legislators, to show that they're the pro-gun candidate in the race, will tout their GOA rating or their endorsement from Gun Owners of America. And and we have all that up on the web too. Our ratings, who we've endorsed, that type of thing, so people can see that at gunowners.org.
Outstanding. So what would you say is probably one of the most major accomplishments that the GOA has done here in recent times?
Well, I think let's say under the Obama administration, a couple of things. In 2013, like I mentioned, the New York Times did credit our members with being the key force that killed gun control. We caught wind of a backroom deal that was taking place between Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia and some other pro-gun groups, and we put that out to our members, and they created such a loud outpouring that it absolutely killed the deal. And the New York Times documented how people were showing up at town hall meetings and demanding no gun control whatsoever, and it absolutely put the kibosh on any gun control that year. Senator Harry Reid in 2016 said it was GOA that killed gun control that year. You may remember after the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, there was talk of the no-fly, no-buy legislation, which is basically, who knows how people get onto the no-fly list. But if you end up there, no due process, now all of a sudden that would become a gun ban. Well, we opposed it all. There were other groups that were supporting some variants of it, but we opposed it all. Harry Reid was so furious with us. He said that GOA is worse than bad. So we take that as a badge of honor. But I think those and I think those are key, Mark, because sometimes people say you can't win battles by remaining no compromise. You've got to give a little. You've got to there are people who would like us to agree to maybe less gun control and then sign off on it to prevent worse gun control. And first of all, our attitude is we can't do that, because if we're always giving ground, pretty soon we're not going to have anything left to defend. But secondly, I would say to that, we're actually winning battles by drawing the line and saying we're not going to budge. We're not going to compromise. I think one other key battle that we've been, thankfully very successful in is constitutional carry. Gun Owners of America was actually the original group in the mid-90s pushing for and supporting constitutional carry. And at the time, there was a lot of heavy lifting, because there was actually even others in the pro-gun community at the time. I know it's kind of hard to imagine now, but they were saying, no, we got to know who's getting the carry permits. That's not a good idea. Bad guys might be carrying. And we're like, they're carrying anyway. If this is a God-given right that's protected by the Constitution, then we shouldn't be asking for permission. And so we started pushing it hard. And now I'm happy to say we have 14 states. Vermont has always had, in fact, you may remember back in the 90s, it was called Vermont style carry. But now 13 other states have joined. So, it was a real heavy lift at first, because not only were we fighting the antis, we were also having to challenge some of those, on our side of the fence as well. But again, our method of lobbying is to not just, me or those who work here in the national headquarters to go and, wine and dine and lobby. No, our method of lobbying is getting our members to contact their legislators and put the heat on them. And that's been very effective.
That is great to hear. So one of the things I would like to ask is, what would you say is the most determining, or I should say, the most stark contrast between, say, the GOA and the NRA?
Well, yeah, and I want to be careful here, Mario. I don't want to speak ill of any other groups.
Of course not. No.
But I would just say, in terms of our attitude, we look at the Second Amendment, what it says: the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And we take that literally. That's our charge. No compromise. We will not sign on to, folks who are our members know they hear from us and get engaged in battles that they don't hear other groups talking about. Like, for example, constitutional carry in the 1990s, we were the only ones doing that. And it's because we're birthed in that idea of no compromise, shall not be infringed. And so I think that's probably if there's one thing, the biggest determining difference.
Great. And that's kind of what I really wanted to drive at is, I'm an NRA member. I'm a GOA member as of today, and I'm excited to be a part of both organizations. But, I'm more of a libertarian. I'm more of a, hey, government, get out of my life. You have bestowed upon me these God-given rights in our Bill of Rights. Let me keep it, and I will be responsible. And that's why I really support the aim and the drive of the GOA. Now, I do understand the purpose of the NRA. I don't necessarily agree 100% with the direction that they've been going over these last, I'd say, probably decade, with especially here in the last couple of years with some of the things that they've been pushing. But they are a very big voice, right? So, and hopefully, the idea is to get individuals like yourself onto my shows, and hopefully some of the other YouTubers will be able to pick you up as well. And so we can start building your voice as well to be just as loud and prominent with the NRA opposed to any other group. So I really, really hope that and wish that for you guys. So anything else that you wanted to add on that piece?
Well, just, I appreciate that, because obviously, as you're alluding to, there's strength in numbers. And one of our key mottos is taken from what the late Senator Everett Dirksen used to say: when I feel the heat, I see the light. And so the more people that we have, the more heat that we're putting on legislators, not only to get things like constitutional carry passed, but also to stop things like universal background checks in 2013 and no fly, no buy in 2016, and obviously other battles that are going to come down the pike as well.
Yep. Very much so. Very much so. And Frank Hellman, he kind of makes a good point. I would hope that the NRA's perspective would change a little bit and be a little bit more contemporary. But Frank says that the NRA protects hunters and target shooters primarily, in his opinion. And I think that that was kind of the thought of gun owners, say, in the 1980s, that they just want to keep their guns so they can go hunting. But that's not, there's been, I would say, probably in the last decade, there's been a awakening that, oh, wait a second, this says that we have the right to protect ourselves, to ensure that we get to protect our home and family, and it should not be infringed. So at least I've been awakened in the last, I would say, decade to that belief. So,
well, what's a classic example of that, Mark, would be background checks. From a hunter's perspective, what's the big deal, right? I mean, you're not really being inconvenienced if that is your starting point. On the other hand, if your starting point is this is a God-given right, and therefore there should not be any hurdles or hoops to jump through for any law-abiding citizen. You shouldn't have to be proving your innocence to the government before you exercise that right or any other right, whether it's your First Amendment right or even rights not mentioned in the Bill of Rights, your right to travel, your right to be married. Government shouldn't be putting any type of hurdles before you exercise your right. And what we have seen is tremendous abuses, sadly, because of things like background checks, like the case of Carol Bound in New Jersey, which was just very tragic, which was a background check gone bad, where the state says they're going to take up to 30 days, but then they even take longer. And she wanted a firearm to protect herself against a violent ex-boyfriend, and the state kept delaying. She was never able she never got approval. And she was a law-abiding citizen. She wanted to wait, and sadly, it cost her her life. And her violent ex-boyfriend didn't need a gun. He used a knife to show up at her house and kill her. It's those type of things. 95% of the initial denials under the NICS system are false positives. People are being denied who should not be denied. There are people who have the same last name or same name as somebody else. I was at a dinner just the other day and was talking to a guy who runs into this every single time he goes to buy a firearm. There's some bad guy in the system who has a very similar name to him, and so it's caused all kinds of delays for him. See, this is the type of thing. And yet we know it's not stopping bad guys. The background check is not stopping bad guys from getting guns. You just look at several of the mass shootings that have occurred. They either passed background checks or they got around them by stealing their firearm. So, all that to say, that's just one example. That's one reason why Gun Owners of America has always opposed the background check. And in fact, we support its repeal.
Outstanding. That's a really good stance, and a deep dive into the perspective and the position of the GOA. Heading over to the chat room real quick, I wanted to say hi to a few people. We've got GGLFGGG. Thank you, sir, for swinging on by. Big Al, Logan White, Vash Matrix, William Luttrell, Midas Weebly, and Coda Boy 32 jumped in there. Thank you, sir. Special K was in there as well. Thanks for swinging by before you had to head out. The Gun Snob, appreciate you swinging in. And let's see if we've got anyone else. Devil Dog, thanks for swinging in. And you guys are awesome. I see there's some really good conversations going on in the chat room. One question came from Big Al. He said, what's the GOA membership? Can you kind of talk to us about what happens with your GOA membership, how much it costs, where to go, so on and so forth?
Sure. We have over 1.5 million members, so we're growing. And membership is $20 for a year. Although we also have a Patriot membership, which we have people who are supporting us monthly. I mean, even as low as $5 a month, but that is just a huge, tremendous help to keep us on the front lines. And then, of course, we have a lifetime membership for $500. So those are the different levels of membership that people have. And if people are not familiar with us at all, I always encourage people, look, go to our site at gunowners.org and sign up for our email alerts. I mean, they're free, but at least you're getting engaged in the fight. And like I said earlier, you'll find that there will be battles that will engage you in that you may not see, others talking about, but they're important nevertheless. Like back in the 90s, constitutional carry, or recently things like no fly, no buy, or universal background checks, things like that. So anyway, that's a great way to get your feet wet with gun owners.
Outstanding. And I already have a link to that down in the description below. If you guys are interested, you can just swing on by, do the research yourself, so you guys know exactly everything that's going on with that as well. Another quick question is, we had one from Andrew. I'm going to kind of paraphrase it a little bit, but do you think that the GOA and or the NRA, and I hate to lump you guys in the same pot, because I know you're pretty different, but at the same time you're both somewhat aiming at the same direction.
Absolutely.
The question here is, when will the GOA or the NRA help us with our infringement problems and include Firearms Safety Act of 2013, which bans certain styles of assault weapons except for the H-bars? Are you familiar with that? Is that something that you guys are working towards, or what do you think?
Well, I assume you're talking about different state level bans and restrictions. We just filed an amicus brief in the Supreme Court for a New York ban restriction. We look, obviously, we're always guided by what types of, where can our time and resources and membership be best utilized. So we're constantly looking. We've been involved in New York and Oregon, in Washington, California, a lot of the state level restrictions there. But like I was saying, we've got an amicus brief filed before the Supreme Court just this month. In New York City, you have to get a permit to have a gun in your home or your place of business, but that's the only place you can have it. You can take it unloaded to a gun range in the city, but you can't even take it out of the city to a gun range somewhere else in New York State. You can't if you have a second home, you can't take it there. So we have filed to knock down that law. But I think what's most important about this amicus brief, because this really is going to help people all over the country. It's attacking the judicial mentality, which says we can empower ourselves to balance rights. And if so we as the judge determine, does the right to safety, let's say, outweigh your right to own a firearm? And of course, liberal judges always answer that question with a yes. Ironically, they're actually making us less safe the more and more restrictions that they implement. So anyway, all that to say, we are involved, and we're also always open and welcome people contacting Gun Owners of America and saying, hey, here's what's going on in our state, because we don't necessarily have state groups that are associated with us. So we rely on our eyes and ears out there, and that pulls us into a lot of battles. I mean, that's what happened in Idaho just a couple years back. That's how we got constitutional carry passed. It was the local gun group. They're saying, hey guys, we need help in this state with constitutional carry. Michael Bloomberg is purchasing ads all over the state and getting all kinds of calls going into the governor's office. And at the time, the calls were running 5-1 against. And people in the governor's office were saying, we don't know how this is going to go. The governor's being very close to the vest on this. He was kind of weak in the campaign on it. And so anyway, so they were saying, hey, we need you guys to come in. And as soon as we did, we got the calls, not only matched, but running more pro-gun versus anti-gun, and the governor signed the bill. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, he's a Republican governor, probably didn't have to do too much pushing, but let's face it, if he's on the fence himself, if calls are running 5-1 against, that's the perfect excuse for a Republican governor to veto the bill. I mean, that's what we saw in Oklahoma. A Republican governor vetoed the constitutional carry bill. So you can't take this kind of thing for granted. But anyway, that's just an example of how we work with activists in the states and local gun groups in the states.
So going back to your comments about New York, a great question came in and a counter to that, but GG says, hasn't the Supreme Court haven't they already validated the Second Amendment as written through Heller versus DC?
Yeah, no, they have. But the judges at the federal level are ignoring not only the Second Amendment, but ignoring what Heller said. And but then the Supreme Court hasn't taken any cases since Heller and McDonald on Second Amendment. So it's really important to have some of these other cases where the Supreme Court can specifically smack down those judges and say, no, we're not talking about the technical terms intermediate scrutiny or some other type of scrutiny. In fact, Heller didn't set any type of scrutiny for balancing rights. It used a text, history, and tradition standard, which means the text of the Second Amendment means what it says, shall not be infringed. So it is important to, it's kind of like, having a speed limit, but then never enforcing it. Well, everybody's going to speed if you don't enforce it. So it's important to pick out a few people and say, okay, pull over to the side of the road, you're going to pay a fine. You start doing that enough, word gets out, and people start respecting the law. It's the same with federal judges, and any comparison to children that you want to draw would probably be applicable as well.
Right, exactly. So 1776 or bust is he is a YouTuber out of New York. He is a very vocal individual about what's going on in New York. He's just asking, and I know you've touched with this real quick, but he's asking what's going on. What does GOA have going on in New York? You've already talked about the brief. Could you kind of just describe the correct me if I'm wrong, the amicus brief, exactly what that means and what
Right,
it's
sure.
supposed to.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And anytime if I'm throwing out technical terms, let me know. An amicus brief is a friend of the court brief. It's a Latin phrase, but it's a friend of the court brief where we put down our legal arguments and submit it to the court on the behalf of the plaintiff. And it's interesting because I was reading what court watchers were saying just recently that the oral arguments, they said, really don't have that much weight anymore. What really counts these days is the briefs, including the amicus briefs, because that's what the judges look at. And I can actually validate that. We have seen in past cases, even at the Supreme Court level, judges using language or ideas from our amicus briefs in their decisions. So that's basically what an amicus brief is we're presenting additional arguments which weren't necessarily brought by the original plaintiff. Even in the Heller case, USA Today asked us to do the opposing, as you can imagine, USA Today took the position defending the gun ban in Washington, D.C. But they told us they read all the briefs in that case, and they came to us and they said the reason why we asked you guys to write the opposing piece, yours was the only one that made the case that the Second Amendment in and of itself invalidates all gun control. So see, that's the type of perspective that we're trying to bring in these briefs.
Outstanding, and that's obviously for a lot of my watchers, my viewers, and hopefully some individuals that I'm around, like-minded individuals, they like to take that position as well. So real quick, I just wanted to say again, hey to everybody in the chat room. Thanks so much. And Fan TV, I see your question. I'll get to you here in just a second. Now, I will say for you watchers, we won't be able to dive into each and every single state as to what GOA's got going on in your state. By all means, get over to Gun Owners of America's website and sign up for their newsletter so you can get updates on things that are going on, possibly in your area or nationwide. So with that being said, there's some individuals in the chat room that has been kind of chiming up about the upcoming election here, the midterms elections on November 6th. One individual, this will be the first time he's voting, and I've seen some other individuals say that that they've always voted, and they're kind of talking about how they're voting. So Gun Owners of America just released their 2018 candidate ratings guide. Eric, can you tell us about what that is? And just so you know, I do have a link to that down in the description below if you guys want to check it out. But can you kind of describe what you're trying to break down?
Absolutely. And thanks for putting that link there, because that is really important information for people to have. We rate every single race in the country, in the Congress, for the Senate, not only the incumbent, but the challenger as well. For the incumbents, we use their record, their voting record. And so you can also see the voting records for the House and Senate on the website as well. But for the challengers, obviously that can be a little bit more difficult because a lot of them don't have a record. So we survey, we have a very detailed questionnaire for every challenger. We also scour the internet to find statements that they've made. I mean, obviously we know politicians love to come to Washington, D.C. and vote one way, and then they go back to their home and misrepresent. They'll put on a hunting jacket and talk about how, now they're glad it's hunting season. And meanwhile, in D.C., they've been voting to restrict our rights. I mean, a classic case of this is Claire McCaskill, senator from Missouri. She was in the news recently because Project Veritas outed her and her campaign, talking about how she basically lies to her constituents about the gun issue because she has a lot of Republican voters who support her. So she doesn't want to tell them the truth. And yet here, the campaign staff was admitting, yeah, we've even got people from every town, Bloomberg's group, either working for them or working with them. And, they're, totally on board with the Bloomberg agenda. But of course, there's a disconnect because they're lying to the constituents. Well, our rating basically does a Project Veritas in every single district in every single state, and not by going undercover, but obviously it's a big project where we're going through the whole country, grabbing the information and then putting it in in one place where people can not only just check their congressmen and their senators, but you can look at any congressman or any race in the country and see how we've rated them based either on their voting record or on their answers to the survey questions.
Outstanding. And I've already done that with my state and my district in the state of Kansas, the Free State, as we like to refer to ourselves. But kidding aside, I've already done that. I've done my research, and I don't like to be necessarily a one topic or one concern voter, but this is obviously a big concern for me. Here in Kansas, we have very few issues that we really need to concern ourselves with, but we definitely don't want to become complacent. Even if you live in a predominantly red state, it's easy to become complacent and allow some, bluer shades to start filtering in.
Yeah, and Mark, before you go, can I just make a comment about that? I'm so glad you
Absolutely.
mentioned that because that's the other thing the rating can be used for. I mean, obviously, not everybody will necessarily use guns as their only issue for voting. I don't know why they wouldn't, but okay, people have other issues too that as a citizen that they take into account. So even if guns isn't the only issue that they're using, although I will say guns is one of those issues that will even drive people to cross party lines to vote solely on the gun issue. But apart from that, it becomes an important lobbying tool. And as you look through that rating, people will see, you mentioned you're from a red state, and yet they, sometimes you see these blue tendencies showing up in them. Well, you can run through the whole country. Don Young in Alaska, Hal Rogers in Kentucky, Liz Cheney in Wyoming. I mean, these are, very, very pro-gun states. There is no reason why anybody representing those states shouldn't be an A+++. And yet those three that I just mentioned, if you look in our rating, they're rated as Bs. That means they've cast enough anti-gun votes. They're not even an A anymore. And so, okay, so let's say they're running against the commie. I understand if people still go ahead and vote for them, but at least now you can look at, okay, let me see how they voted because all the votes are listed on the GOA website. And then that becomes a lobbying tool where people can say, hey, Hal, or, hey, Mr. Young, what's with this vote here? Why were you voting for gun control here? See, that's the kind of thing that they need to hear. Otherwise, they get really comfortable thinking, oh, I'm in a red state and they don't have anywhere else to go.
Yeah, exactly right. And, again, we can easily become complacent, especially if we think that, oh, well, Republicans, they seem to have everything kind of locked down. So what's my vote going to matter? And I personally feel that while the presidential election is important, I see that the midterm elections are always just as important, if not even more important, because you're voting your local and state representatives to represent you specifically. And that's where real change happens. So definitely get out November 6th and vote. One of the things that popped up, speaking of voting and some of the concerns around that, is Alaskan Ballistics had a question about red flag laws and what can he do to fight those types of laws that are starting to get kind of filtered into Alaska of all places. And I said to vote, get out and vote, to vote the individuals who are proposing those things out of office so that you can ensure that your freedoms are not infringed upon, and then spread the word as well. Would you agree to that, or is there anything else that he might be able to be looked to do?
Absolutely. Well, the one other thing that is going to sound like a shameless self-promotion, but sign on with Gun Owners of America. We have been extremely active all over the country in opposing these. We have lobbied in every single state legislature this past year, and we've utilized our members. And that's been very important. And in fact, I'll give you an example. In Pennsylvania, the House Speaker was going to bring up the bill thinking, oh, this is a non-controversial thing. We so overwhelmed the House Speaker with our members, plus getting legislators to go talk to him, which is when he admitted, gee, I thought this was a non-controversial thing. Well, he pulled the bill. So a lot of times we're able to kill the legislation just by getting it not voted on. But we've been involved in every single state, and we were able to kill it in over 12 states where a red flag law was actually moving. And by the way, for those who aren't familiar with it, just in a nutshell, red flag laws, we call them gun confiscation orders, because that's really what they are. Somebody and it varies from state to state as to who it is that would have authority to do this, but they can go to a judge and say, that Mark is kind of crazy, he scares me. And, the judge can slap a gun confiscation order where his guns are gone. Now, they will say, oh, Mark has due process because he can go to court to get his guns back. But see, now the whole legal system has been inverted. Rather than proving you guilty beyond a shadow of a doubt, now you're proving your innocence. It's
Exactly.
kind of like Brett Kavanaugh trying to prove, where he was every single day of that, that summer. Proving your innocence, that's not our job. It's the government's job to prove you're guilty. And see, that's the thing with these red flag laws. It's not even based on anything you've done wrong or been convicted of. It's just mere allegations. So you don't get your attorney there. You don't get a trial by jury. You don't even get to be present to face your accuser. So these red flag laws or gun confiscation orders are really dangerous because it throws due process out the window. Basically, we got a view this summer of what it looks like when you throw due process out the window, when you can just make allegations against somebody like a Supreme Court justice nominee, just make allegations and there's no supporting, corroborating witnesses or evidence. And yet, now under these laws, you're losing your gun rights and then having to pay $10,000 to go to court to prove your innocence. Very dangerous. Gun Owners of America is fighting these hard.
Yeah, that is extremely dangerous. One of the other questions that I had popped up from Fan TV was he was also asking, what does GOA have going on in Minnesota? Just to kind of put this out there as a blanket statement for all states, do you have representation? Do you have a local chapter individual that you can go to in your state to talk about certain issues, or is that a opportunity that GOA is looking to fill?
That would be more of an opportunity, and that's what I was saying earlier. That we do work with state groups and who are like-minded, or members who are very active and will draw us into battles. But no, we don't have actual chapters in every state. We're obviously involved in some states more heavily than others, and that all has to do with what's going on in the state. What groups are there, and are they requesting our assistance? Because our attitude is we're here to help. We're not here to come over and take over what's going on in the state. We're here to help. And like in Idaho, the state group says, hey, we need your help. We came in with a big splash and it made a difference. So again, people can contact us and say, hey, we've got something going on here legislatively, we could use your help. That's something we'll definitely take a look at.
That's outstanding. And, maybe there's an opportunity for for us to team up and maybe leverage, social media in that aspect to try to get volunteers to be a representative in the state that they live in. So we'll definitely let's kind of jot that down, and we'll come back to that on through email. So with that being said, let me take a second real quick, head back over to the chat room. You guys are just hammering the chat room tonight. Great questions going on in there. Some questions going back and forth between a lot of individuals asking, hey, what's the laws in your state like? That's pretty interesting. Let's see. Double Dog says, I used to live in Idaho, and then I moved closer to Campen because of my Marine Corps. But now I wish I would have kept my property in Idaho. Back in the 80s, California was a nice place to live. So that's, pretty cool. Yeah. It's one of those things, when you live in a certain state and you're used to it, you never know what you have until you don't have it. So remember that. Remember that when election time comes. So, all right, Eric, tell me, what is your hope for the midterm elections? What do you, naturally, a lot of us like-minded individuals want to see the Republicans remain in power in the House and still retain the Senate. But what is your overarching hope for the midterms?
Well, certainly for starters, we don't want Nancy Pelosi becoming House Speaker. That will... we'll be seeing red flag laws, aka gun confiscation orders. We'll be seeing universal background checks. But offensively, we would lose all momentum for concealed carry reciprocity. And really, we want to gain pro-gun seats in the Congress. So that we can get constitutional carry reciprocity passed. We think this is very important. You can, and not that driving is a right per se, but you can get in your car and drive all over the country. You can't do that with a firearm. If you have, if you can carry in Florida, you just can't get in your car and drive all the way up to Maine. Not very easily, anyway. Certainly not concealed carrying. So, that's the kind of thing that needs to change. We think that is a constitutional approach, legislation that Congress is authorized to pass. That's been one of our key items that we've been pushing. So anyway, a lot of this, and, there are several races around the country that are very close, and gun owners could make a difference in these races. This is one reason why we think these ratings are so important. And again, I would just encourage, it's not just about you taking the information and using it, although that's huge in and of itself, but taking it and spreading it to your pro-gun family and your pro-gun friends and encouraging them to get out and vote. That's really important. We want to get a pro-gun Congress. President Trump has said he will sign a concealed carry reciprocity bill if it's sent to him. So, these next 2 years, we want to get a bill put on his desk.
Yeah, outstanding. And I see a lot of comments in the chat room that says that, hey, my opinion is that if you don't vote, then you have nothing to complain about, or you don't have a voice. And I'd like to believe that, but there's this little thing called First Amendment that lets people say whatever they want. So I support the fact that if they decide not to vote, they still have the right to say that they don't like it. Because there could be individuals that you vote for or are asked to vote for that are not going to have your best interests in mind. You could have someone that they would call themselves a Republican, but they're not really Republican, and they're going up against a Democrat. So who are you going to vote for, right? Here in the state of Kansas, we have just that specific thing. We have a quote unquote independent who is actually a staunch Democrat and decided to run as an independent just so he could try to get elected, and then just sign in a whole bunch of Democratic laws or propose them, or whatever the case may be. So you have to do your homework. GOA is going to help you do that homework with their candidate rating, and also search the web for your districts as well to ensure that you are making a very, very wise decision. Hopefully we can retain the House and the Senate so we can get as Eric said, the reciprocity across President Trump's desk. So the next question I'd like to ask is the biggest thing that we, as the huddled masses, as us normal folk out here, what can we do to continue to support and defend the Second Amendment? What would you think?
Well, certainly with these next 2 to 3 weeks coming up, as we've been talking about getting out and vote, but again, not just you, but anybody that you have influence over or have a listening ear or that you can encourage to get out and vote. I'll never forget 1984. I was in college, and because I was away in another state, I wasn't going to be able to vote in the presidential election. And but my parents made sure that I voted. And so one day, I'm on my fraternity hall, and a messenger comes, and I forget who it was, if it was Western Union or UPS or FedEx, or it was the post office. I don't remember, but anyway, they came to my room. I opened it there in front of them. I filled out the ballot, voted for Ronald Reagan, and then there was a return envelope, and I sent it off. Sent off my ballot. And you know what? I'm doing the same thing. I've got 2 kids who are out of state right now in an internship. They're not going to be back for the election. So this past week, I had the request for an absentee ballot sent to them down in Florida. And so they texted me today. They filled it out and got it sent back in. So that's the thing. So if are you a dad or a grandfather? You've got kids and grandkids. Make sure. I mean, if where they're at politically, if they're supporting the Second Amendment, if they are, make sure that they've made plans to have their vote cast, or that they're going to be going to, make sure that they're going to be showing up on election day. So all that to say that's one of the things huge right now. I mean, that's the elephant in the room. Pardon the pun, but I'm not advocating one particular party.
I see what you did there. Yeah.
But that's the immediate thing that we can be doing. Outside of that, I think one of the best things is the strength in numbers that we've been talking about. And again, there's a lot of good groups out there. I would certainly encourage, signing up with Gun Owners of America, because again, we're going to be fighting battles that you may not hear other groups talking about. We've won a lot of battles, taking a no compromise stance, a lot of offensive battles as well as defensive battles. And so, it's one thing, we all have the right to make a phone call to our congressman or send a letter, but if it's just you on your own, it's kind of like a drop in the bucket. But when it's part of a wave, that makes a difference. That's the thing the New York Times said was just so impressive. What killed Obama's gun control was just the wave of people. And they said, especially hitting Republican senators who were on the fence. I mean, there's a lot of Republican senators who were considering universal background checks in 2013. And we don't have that today. And it's because GOA members were really, really loud.
That's awesome. That is great to hear. Great to hear. So let's move on. I've got one last question before we start wrapping things up. And this may be a little bit, we've got plenty of time to answer it. But the last question was along the lines of what I had already planned, as far as some of the things that are out on that's kind of out there with the Congress and Senate right now, as far as national reciprocity, the Hearing Protection Act, the Shush Act, and then also Vash Matrix also asked, how's the fighting to fix NICS or repealing NICS going? How are all of those things going as of right now?
Well, taking your last question first, fix NICS, the authorization for it, sadly, was put into an omnibus spending bill in March, and the president signed it. I mean, it was part of a bigger bill. We would have hoped that the president would have vetoed the bill, even for other reasons, for any reason. But quite honestly, the president supported fix NICS. So anyway, we're stuck with the authorization. I don't know that money has been appropriated for it yet, but it's kind of like a bomb waiting to go off. They can appropriate money for it at any time. And for those who don't know what Fix Nix is, basically it just puts background checks on steroids, just authorizes tons and tons more money to get more names into the system, and it's still not going to stop bad guys from getting guns. And it just means more people are going to have to be good people will be hassled when they go to buy a firearm. We want to just start with the nearest gun control law and just start repealing and going backwards. Obviously, that's a tall order, but that's what the Second Amendment shall not be infringed is all about. So that's our agenda. The Shush Act, deregulating suppressors. Yeah, I was talking to a guy from the Netherlands last week. He was a student, and he pointed out. He said, it's so ironic because he said back home we have a lot more gun control than you do, but you know what? If you do have a gun, boy, you are encouraged to get a suppressor. And by the way, he called it a suppressor, not a silencer. I was very impressed with him. He said, yeah, it's like, he goes, I don't get it. What is it with you Americans? I said, I don't know. It is one of those strange things. Yeah, we have more freedom generally, but when it comes to the suppressor issue, all of a sudden, the antis go crazy and they start talking about the mafia from the 30s and yada, yada. It's all ridiculous. And anyway, that's one of our agenda items as well, to repeal that, the 86 Hughes Act. I mean, there's a lot to do. But obviously, it's going to mean, we're going to have to to get rid of a lot of the people who are in the Congress. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
Politically speaking, we're going to have to vote them out and put in people that respect and honor the Constitution and the Second Amendment, especially.
Well, I got one more question. Well, let's see. Yeah, I got one more question real quick before I get to that one. Alaskan Ballistics, thank you so much. Guard every school, spread the word. Thanks. I appreciate it. Please do swing on over to Alaskan Ballistics YouTube channel. He's got a really, really great video that talks about Guard Every School. So please check that out. If you're on social media, please hashtag Guard Every School. It is an initiative to ensure that every school has the protection that it needs against any type of violence that may come upon them. But moving to my very last question, I promise this will be the last question, but it's actually a very good comment / question. I think I already know the answer. A lot of people may already know the answer, but Erich, what would you say is the major issue since, the GOP, Republicans, the right, whatever you want to say, since they've had the majority in the House and the Senate and the presidency for the last 2 years, why have we not seen more action on gun rights from the legislative and executive branches?
There's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it has to do with, unfortunately, the shootings that took place.
Exactly what I was going to say. Yep.
I mean, let's face it. The left is very loud as well. Obviously, their strength is not so much in numbers, but just in screaming loud. And, you probably can't really understand what it's like. We're right outside the Beltway here in Washington, D.C. It's an echo chamber inside that Beltway that is very loud, and a lot of these congressmen just don't have backbones and they're not willing to stand up. And so rather than saying what our president said, I mean, and kudos to him for saying, hey, these terrorists or these bad guys need bullets flying back at them. I mean, that's the answer. That's what they should be saying. But instead, we were going to have a hearing and a markup, in other words, moving to a vote on deregulating suppressors. And like the very weekend or a couple weeks beforehand, before that was to come up, that was the Las Vegas shooting. And so Republicans, retreated in horror. So, a lot of it is just, fear. Honestly, we've had some issues with the president, supporting Fix Nix and ban on bump stocks and things like that. But in many ways, he's been very good, not only on the Second Amendment, but I think teaching his party how to fight. And the Brett Kavanaugh hearings was a great example of that. You saw Republicans finding backbones that, I think a lot of people had not seen for years or decades. And kudos to the
Lindsey,
president.
yeah, Lindsey Graham. I mean, he came
Lindsey
out.
Graham, yeah, who would have
Yeah,
thought, right? So,
exactly.
you know, I, anyway, there's a lot to that answer, or to that question, but I think that's one of the big things. It's just fear, absolute fear, and that's one reason why we need to be here. Why, even though we may not have the megaphone that the New York Times and or ABC or CNN has, at the same time, we can mobilize members. And that's how we killed universal background checks in 2013 and no fly no buy in 2016. It's mobilizing our vast army of members. And so we're here to counter that. But let's just face it, it's going to be a battle. Now, having said that, we're still able, using guerrilla tactics, politically speaking, we're able to get things repealed. We worked with Senator Coburn of Oklahoma in 2009 to repeal the ban in national parks. And what? Obama signed that into law? Yeah, because we worked with Coburn to get it attached as an amendment to I think it was a banking, no, credit card reform bill, which Obama really wanted, and he wasn't willing to veto the bill just for that one amendment. So we got a repeal of the ban in national parks. So even with the loud enemy, political enemy that we're facing, we're still able to get a lot done. But again, it requires a lot of work, a lot of time, and a lot of effort mobilizing our members.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that is pretty awesome. I guess I didn't realize the amendment to the credit card reform bill had the language talking about being able to carry in federal parks. That's pretty
Yeah,
awesome.
the one downside to that whole battle, Mark, was that Obama would later in the future refer to that as an example of how he supports the Second Amendment, when he would have vetoed it if it came before him as a standalone. He's such a hypocrite. But anyway,
Yeah, yeah,
you know,
that's pretty
alas,
awesome.
what can you do?
What can you do? What can you do? That's pretty awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're approaching an hour, and Mr. Pratt, he has his hands full. I can tell you, I hope by having him on tonight that he's kind of shed some light on the GOA, what they're doing, what they're aiming to do, some of the great tools that they have in their arsenal to better educate all of you out there. If I didn't get to your question, I'm sorry. You guys have been killing it in the chat room tonight, talking an awful lot, and it's great to see that. I can tell you at the end of the day, anyways, you have a brand new member from me as being a member of the GOA. So I did that today. I wanted to make sure that I am supporting those individuals who are supporting my rights as well. So I see that Keith Gregory, he says he's joining the GOA tomorrow. So please stand firm on that. If anybody else wants to jump on board, please let me know. A link is right down in the description below if you guys are interested on that. So before we say a final to do, Mr. Pratt, is there anything else that you wanted to throw out there?
Well, I think we covered a lot of ground, Mark. I just want to say thank you to you, for having me on. It's been great to talk to your viewers. Thank you so much. I mean, I know, I love what you're doing, talking about Kerry and things like that. And, so I appreciate you getting a little political here for this hour, which is kind of maybe out of your norm. But as you said earlier, I mean, this is real important. We're coming up to a crucial election. So I appreciate you taking the time to have me on to talk about that.
Absolutely. I was excited to be able to see you at Iraq Veterans 88th
Yes,
Range Day. That was how we got our face-to-face introduction, and how things quickly rolled to get you on the show. That was completely awesome. Tell Jordan thank you so much for all of his support
I
as
will.
well. That is pretty awesome. So that is going to cover it for tonight and this edition. We can get Mr. Pratt off and running and getting him back home with his family. So again, thank you so much. Links down in the description for everything GOA related. I'll add some more things as well. If you guys want to watch the rerun, all that jazz because I know there's a lot of information. But at the end of the day, go out and vote. Vote you make sure that your voice is heard. Make sure that you're voting for the candidates, and GOA is going to help you decide which ones to vote for. So with that being said, that's really all I got this time. Thanks so much for everybody in the chat room and being a great group of people supporting the Second Amendment. With that, that's all I've got. Keep calm and carry. Good night, y'all. Take care.